You are staring at the ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
It is 3 a.m. Your heart is, racing against your ribs. Your jaw is locked tight.
We have all been exactly there.
Right? And your brain is meticulously projecting this just catastrophic, worst-case scenario about a strategic decision you made at work 12 hours ago.
The email's already sent.
Exactly. The email is sent, the die is cast. There's literally nothing you can do until the sun comes up. And yet your mind is demanding that you solve the unsolvable right now.
It wants an immediate resolution.
It really does. So in that exact agonizing moment, you have to ask yourself, are you the anxiety? Are you fundamentally made of panic? Or are you just the vast open sky watching a localized storm pass through?
That is a profound distinction.
It changes everything. Welcome to part 2 of our double feature, focusing exclusively on chapters 0, 1, 2, and 3.
It is so excellent to be back to really dig into this, because that 3 a.m. scenario you just painted, it's the perfect entry point.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it represents the exact moment where all of our intellectual posturing completely falls apart.
Yeah, the theory goes out the window at 3 a.m.
Exactly.
Well, I want to set the mission for you, the listener, right out of the gate here. In part 1, we examined the massive, sweeping architecture of the source material. We were essentially in orbit, right?
Looking down at the blueprints.
Looking down at the blueprints of human consciousness, debating these grand theories of how the mind and the universe interact. It was highly theoretical. But today
is different.
Today, we are putting on our hard hats. We are bringing this entirely down to the ground level. This deep dive is relentlessly focused on the participant.
The boots on the ground.
Yeah, and by that, I mean you, the listener.
Yeah.
We are going to deconstruct how you take these highly intellectual, borderline mystical frameworks and actually force them to work for you.
Because if they don't work, what's the point?
Right. We are talking about the checkout line at the grocery store, or that suffocating meeting with your board of directors, or, that 3 a.m. staring contest with your bedroom ceiling.
That distinction is just paramount. We are officially transitioning from the passive act of learning to the active, messy friction of living.
Friction is a great word for it.
It really is. I mean, it is one thing to possess a conceptual map. You can memorize the longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates for peace, or somatic awareness, or emotional regulation.
You can pass a written test on it.
Right. You could pass a written test on the mechanics of mindfulness. But if you never actually put your boots on the ground and walk the terrain, that map is essentially a useless piece of paper.
It's just theory.
Exactly. The text eloquently describes this transition as moving from the foyer of understanding into the actual house of being. Today, we are grabbing our boxes and moving into that house.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the furniture we are moving into this house consists of some truly radical, paradigm-shifting concepts.
Heavy furniture.
It's very heavy. We are going to dissect the brutal mechanics of radical self-honesty, which requires dismantling decades of neurological defenses.
Decades of them.
We are going to look at untangling your physical body's raw data from the fictional stories your mind aggressively writes about that data.
That's a huge one.
And we are going to break out of the invisible linguistic prison of labels. And finally, we'll confront what it actually costs to step through the doorway of the known.
It costs a lot.
It does. But I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you're going to walk away with a completely rewritten operating system for your daily life.
I genuinely do not think that is an exaggeration. If you actually apply the methodologies we are about to decode, it fundamentally alters the foundational code of how you perceive and interact with reality.
So we begin with Chapter 0, which immediately confronts us with this deeply visceral visual experiment.
The blank canvas.
Yes, it introduces this concept of the ultimate blank canvas. So the text asks you to imagine standing on a wide sunlit plateau. The air is clear, the breeze is fresh.
Sounds nice.
Right. And when you look over your shoulder, you can see the winding, complex path of your entire life leading up to this exact physiological second.
Every single step.
Every step, you can see the bright, indisputable victories. You see the shadowy, lingering regrets.
The mistakes.
Yeah, the eras where you wandered completely off into the wilderness. Every single variable that has shaped your current state is visible on that path behind you.
It's all there.
But then you turn your head and look forward. And all you see is open sky. It is endless, unscripted possibility.
It is a profoundly disruptive visual, honestly, because its entire purpose is to immediately strip away the heavy, invisible fatalism that almost every single one of us carries around on a daily basis.
Fatalism. Let's dig into that for a second, because I think a lot of high-achieving people listening would deeply deny being fatalistic.
Oh, absolutely.
They'd say, I'm a go-getter. I dictate my future.
Consciously, yes, they might say exactly that. But subconsciously, human beings are just narrative machines. We tend to view our lives as a locked-in script.
A predetermined path.
Right. We look at that path behind us, our past failures, our traumas, our established patterns of behavior, and we extrapolate that data forward. We assume the trajectory is already permanently set.
So we think, well, I have always been a highly anxious person under pressure.
Exactly. Therefore, I will inevitably panic during the presentation next week.
Wow.
That is fatalism. It is the belief that your past is a binding contract on your future. Chapter 0 steps in and violently tears up that contract.
Just rips it to shreds.
It asserts that if the future is genuinely unwritten, then literally nothing is set in stone. Every single moment, every breath, is a localized singularity where you have a fresh chance to reinvent your response. You could steer the machinery of your life in a completely novel direction.
But to actually execute that kind of steering, I mean, you have to deeply understand the machine you're operating.
You have to read the manual.
Exactly, which naturally pulls us into the core framework of Chapter 1. The text introduces this massive structural distinction between the user interface and the operating system.
The UI and the OS.
Right. Now, as someone who spends entirely too much time staring at screens, this tech metaphor really resonated with me. But I want to push it further than just, apps on a phone.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly the architecture of modern computing mirrors human cognition. Think about the device you're using to listen to this right now.
Okay, my phone.
Right. What you interact with is the user interface, the UI. You're tapping smooth glass, swiping colorful icons, opening your email, checking a news feed.
Looking at a calendar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The UI is designed to be loud, engaging, and entirely surface level. It demands your attention. And frankly, we spend our entire waking lives staring at this interface.
Right. If I ask someone what they are thinking about, they will just list off their UI elements.
100%.
They'll say, I'm thinking about the grocery list, I'm worrying about an upcoming deadline, I'm replaying an argument I had with a colleague yesterday, where I definitely should have said that one specific comeback.
We all do that.
Yeah, those are just the apps currently running on the screen.
Exactly. Those fleeting thoughts are just the desktop applications.
Right.
But what makes all of that actually function?
The background stuff.
Right. Beneath the bright colors and the notifications, there is a massive, complex, deeply embedded operating system humming away in the dark.
The OS.
The OS handles the memory allocation, the security protocols, the background updates. It's the fundamental logic gates that determine what the hardware can and cannot do.
And we never even see it.
It is entirely invisible to the average user, but it is the absolute sovereign code that dictates the boundaries of reality for that device.
And the argument here is that the human mind functions on the exact same bifurcated architecture.
Precisely. The thoughts you actively notice, the anxieties, the daily planning, the inner monologue, that is just your UI.
Just the apps.
But underneath those surface apps is your psychological operating system, your deeply held core beliefs, your inherited familial scripts, your physiological baselines for stress.
Your biases about money and relationships.
Yes. Most of us go our entire lives completely unaware of this deeper code. We are merely passive end users of our own minds, frantically clicking whichever app pops up on the screen.
Just reacting to every notification.
Exactly. The goal of this entire framework is to transition you from being a passive user to becoming the systems administrator with root access.
So you can audit and rewrite the base code.
That's the goal.
Well, to give the listener a way to actually visualize stepping into that administrator role, the source material offers another analogy, the theater analogy.
Yeah, it's a classic.
I know this is a classic mindfulness trope, but the way they frame the mechanics of it is just crucial.
Yeah, if the systems architecture metaphor feels too cold or, mechanistic, the theater analogy really grounds it in human experience.
Okay, paint the picture.
Imagine the architecture of your mind as a grand, ornate, cavernous theater. All of those everyday UI thoughts we just analyzed, the anxieties, the plotting, the relentless inner dialogue, those are the actors actively performing on the stage under the bright lights.
And they are putting on quite a show.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is a mundane, repetitive, routine play about your daily schedule. Sometimes it is a high-stakes, catastrophic tragedy about your career failing. Sometimes it is an absurd comedy.
For me, the actors are usually performing this highly complex, panic-inducing thriller where I am running out of time to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist yet.
Exactly. We all have our preferred genres, but here is the critical paradigm-shifting realization.
What is it?
You are not the actors. You are not the script. You are not even the lighting director.
Then what am I?
You are the audience. More specifically, you are the singular witness sitting in the quiet, darkened seats of the auditorium, simply watching the play unfold.
Just watching.
This is the absolute essence of meta-awareness. It is the profound realization that there is a quiet, steady, unmoving locus of awareness inside you that can observe the chaos on the stage without actually being consumed by it.
You don't have to join the play.
Right. You do not have to jump over the orchestra pit, climb onto the stage, and physically wrestle with the actors. You can just sit back in the velvet chair, notice the plot, observe how ridiculous the script is, and calmly decide how you want to react.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Please do.
Because this is where the pristine theory of mindfulness violently collides with messy, exhausting reality.
Fair point.
It is incredibly easy, sitting here in a comfortable room discussing philosophy, to say, just sit back in the velvet chair and be the witness.
Very easy to say.
But what happens when the play on stage is not just a little stressful? What happens when the play is a total unmitigated disaster?
Right.
When the actors are actively screaming, the set is literally on fire, the trapdoors are collapsing, and the script has gone completely out the window. How do you just passively sit and watch when your real, tangible life, your marriage, your finances, your health is in a state of active crisis?
This raises an important question.
I mean, this idea of just watching feels dangerously close to disassociation or apathy.
I am so glad you brought it up, because it targets the exact, painful friction point where almost everyone abandons the practice of meta-awareness.
Because it feels like failing.
Exactly. The massive, pervasive misconception is that stepping into the witness role magically fixes the play. People think that if they observe their anxiety hard enough, the anxiety will evaporate.
The fire on stage will just go out.
Yes, and the actors will suddenly start performing a relaxing pastoral comedy.
Right. We want the reward. We want the calm.
But that is not how it works. Meta-awareness does not stop the rain from falling. It does not magically deposit money into your bank account to pay your mortgage.
I wish it did.
We all do.
Yeah.
It does not cure an illness, and it certainly does not make unpredictable, toxic people in your life suddenly behave rationally. The set might still be very much on fire. The objective reality of your stress remains intact.
So if it doesn't change the objective reality, what is the point?
What radically shifts is your relationship to that friction.
My relationship to it.
Let's look at the cognitive mechanics. When you are fully identified with the actors on stage, when you believe you are the panic, your nervous system interprets every minor inconvenience as an existential threat to your survival.
Your brain just hijacks everything.
Your amygdala hijacks your prefrontal cortex. You literally feel like your entire identity is made of the panic. But when you step back into the witness role, you introduce a tiny fraction of a second of cognitive distance.
Just a tiny gap.
You realize that you are the vast space holding the panic. You are the sky. And the anxiety is just a localized thunderstorm passing through your atmosphere. You are the climate, not the passing weather.
The climate, not the weather. I like that.
The storm is still happening. The thunder is loud. You can physically feel the cold rain. But you no longer hold the fundamental belief that the storm is who you are. It is merely a temporary meteorological mode you are witnessing. You maintain your structural integrity even while taking on water.
That reframing is vital. You maintain your structural integrity. But recognizing that your mind is a theater and that you are the sky holding the weather is completely useless if you constantly lie to yourself about what play is actually happening on the stage.
Oh, the self-deception is real.
Which forces us to look at the foundational requirement for this entire operating system. The text explicitly warns us that if we skip this next step, we are essentially building a highly sophisticated intellectual mansion on a foundation of quicksand.
You can't skip it.
We have to confront pillar one. Radical self-honesty.
Yes. And it is called radical for a reason. This is not about simply not telling lies to your friends. This is about dismantling the microscopic, almost imperceptible lies we tell ourselves every single hour of the day to avoid psychological discomfort.
The source material lists out these flimsy, ubiquitous excuses we all use, and honestly, reading it felt like being audited by a very perceptive therapist.
It's confronting.
It really is. It highlights the sneaky defense mechanisms we deploy the second we encounter a concept or a situation that requires us to change.
We say things like, I fundamentally agree with this, but I just don't have the time to implement it right now.
Or, I'm just wired differently. My brain doesn't work that way. I'm not good at this.
Yes.
Or my absolute favorite, the intellectual bypass. Wow, this is a fascinating sociological theory, but my specific situation is incredibly unique and nuanced, so it doesn't really apply to me.
We have all used every single one of those scripts.
Guilty as charged.
But to truly practice radical self-honesty, we have to look past the surface of the excuse and ask why the brain generates these defenses in the first place.
Right. Why do we lie to ourselves?
It is very easy to look at those excuses, beat yourself up, and conclude that you're just lazy, undisciplined, or inherently resistant to growth. But evolutionary psychology tells a very different story.
What's the story?
The text points out that these defense mechanisms are not malicious. They are not character flaws. They are deeply embedded, highly efficient protective protocols.
Protective against what? Because it feels like they are protecting us from actually improving our lives.
They are protecting your ego from the acute metabolic and emotional cost of cognitive dissonance and the unknown.
The unknown.
Your surface personality, your ego, has spent decades constructing a highly intricate architecture of habits, biases, and blind spots. And these are specifically designed to keep you safe from the emotional pain of vulnerability.
So when you try to change...
When you introduce a concept that requires actual growth, you are demanding that the brain step out of its well-worn, energy-efficient neural pathways and step into the chaotic unknown.
And the brain hates that.
To the primitive parts of the human brain, the unknown is synonymous with danger. So the ego throws up a smokescreen. It deploys the I don't have time script.
It's a distraction.
It is an active redirect. It is trying to desperately shift your attention away from the sharp discomfort of change and shepherd you back to the safety of the familiar, even if that familiar state is deeply miserable.
The brain prefers predictable misery over unpredictable joy.
Because predictability equals survival.
That is deeply illuminating. So it's like an automated mental escape hatch that triggers the second our heart rate goes up regarding a personal flaw.
That's exactly what it is.
But how do we actually bypass that? Because the text gives us a methodology called the wise parent test, and I think this is the linchpin for making honesty functional rather than destructive.
It's a beautiful framework.
Let's paint a picture to explain this. Imagine a high-level executive. They know they need to pivot their company's strategy.
Right.
The current model is slowly bleeding revenue, but pivoting requires admitting they were wrong about the market, and it requires learning an entirely new technology stack.
Very vulnerable.
So they keep delaying the decision. They tell their board, we need more data, or the timing just isn't right in Q3.
Classic excuses.
Now, if this executive decides to be honest with themselves in a toxic way, they will look in the mirror and say, you are a coward. You are an incompetent fraud who is driving this company into the ground because you are too lazy to learn.
Which is an incredibly common internal monologue for high achievers. But it is fundamentally counterproductive.
Exactly, because what happens when you attack yourself like that? You flood your system with toxic shame.
And shame paralyzes you.
Shame makes you want to hide, to numb out, to avoid the problem even harder. This is where the wise parent test comes in. The text asks us to imagine how a truly wise, deeply compassionate, yet firmly boundaried parent would handle a terrified child.
Right.
If a child fakes a stomachache to avoid a math test, a toxic parent screams at them and calls them a liar.
Which causes more shame.
And a permissive parent believes the lie and lets them stay home, completely avoiding the growth opportunity. But the wise parent does neither.
What do?
The wise parent kneels down, looks the child in the eye, strips away the judgment, and gently asks, are you genuinely physically ill, or are you just terrified because you didn't study for the test today?
The brilliance of the wise parent test is that it separates the behavior from the identity. It creates a sterile, emotionally safe container where the truth can actually surface without the threat of catastrophic punishment.
So how do we apply this to ourselves?
Let's take your executive example. Instead of the executive calling themselves a coward, they step into the witness role, they adopt the tone of the wise parent, and they ask their own ego, are we truly waiting on essential data to make this pivot? Or are we deeply afraid that if we try this new strategy and it fails, it will permanently damage our reputation as a visionary leader?
Are we avoiding the pivot because it's bad business or because we are terrified of looking incompetent in front of the board?
Yes.
It completely changes the dynamic of the internal conversation.
It does. Because honesty devoid of compassion is just cruelty disguised as virtue.
Oof. Cruelty disguised as virtue.
Cruelty leads to shame, and shame triggers the ego's defense mechanisms to lock down even tighter. But honesty paired with radical compassion, that is the specific chemical compound required for transformation. You stop fighting your own neurological defenses and start gently dismantling them with curiosity.
That is a phenomenal transition point. Once we have established that safe container of honesty, once we stop lying to ourselves about why we are doing things, we are inevitably forced to look at what we are actually experiencing.
The raw data.
We have to audit the raw data of our lives. And this introduces a concept from the text that uses a delightfully nerdy, highly academic term, dimensional homonymy.
It's quite a mouthful of a phrase.
It really is.
And it sounds incredibly intimidating, like something you would find in a postgraduate linguistics seminar. But the actual functional application of it is incredibly liberating for daily life.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
Because the text uses an analogy that instantly bridges the gap between academic theory and daily reality. The smartphone analogy?
I love this one.
If I hold up my current smartphone and I ask you, what is this object? You would immediately say it is a phone.
Obviously.
But if we break it down dimensionally, is it a high-resolution camera? Yes. Is it a highly sophisticated global positioning system communicating with satellites? Yes.
Is it an endless, algorithmic distraction machine, engineered by neuroscientists to harvest my attention and serve me targeted advertisements?
Absolutely. Is it a simple flashlight for when I drop my keys in a dark parking lot?
Yes.
Yes. It is every single one of those things simultaneously.
At the exact same time.
It does not fracture or break under the weight of having multiple, seemingly contradictory functions.
Yeah.
It is inherently multidimensional. And the core argument of this section is that we must view our internal states, our psychological reactions, our emotional bandwidth, our very identities with this exact same multidimensional lens.
Because human beings have a terrible, neurologically ingrained habit of flattening our experience.
Flattening. What does that mean here?
Cognitive load theory explains this perfectly. The human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's metabolic energy, despite being a fraction of its weight. Processing complex, contradictory, multidimensional emotional data is metabolically expensive.
It takes a lot of juice.
It really does. So the brain relies on heuristics shortcuts. We feel a massive, complex wave of physical and psychological energy, and to save energy, the brain immediately slaps a single, flat, one-dimensional label on it and declares that to be the absolute truth of our existence in that moment.
So dimensional homonymy is the active, conscious refusal to oversimplify your internal reality.
Exactly.
And to give us a practical way to fight that flattening process, the source material provides a brilliant functional methodology called running the stack.
The stack is essential.
I love the stack. It is an auditing process that aggressively separates the raw, unedited physical data your body is experiencing from the highly dramatic, fictionalized stories your mind is desperately trying to write to explain that data. It breaks a human reaction down into 4 distinct sequential layers. Layer 1 is sensation, layer 2 is feeling, layer 3 is thought, and layer 4 is emotion.
Let's dissect this, because if a listener masters this one specific tool, it will mitigate an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering.
Walk us through it.
Layer 1 is sensation. This is the raw, uninterpreted physical data being gathered by your peripheral nervous system. It is pure, dumb biology. Let's use a high-level scenario.
Okay.
You're a senior partner at a firm, and you just found out that a peer, someone you consider a friend, took credit for a massive project you spearheaded.
Oh, wow.
The immediate sensation is an aggressive spike in cortisol and adrenaline. You experience a sudden flush of heat rising in your neck. Your jaw muscles involuntarily clench. Your respiratory rate increases.
Just physical symptoms.
That is layer 1. There's no story yet, just temperature, muscle tension, and neurochemical flooding.
It is just objective, measurable data, like a thermometer and a heart rate monitor could verify layer 1.
Exactly. Then, milliseconds later, we move to layer 2. Feeling. This is the body's immediate energetic aggregation of that raw data.
How does that differ from sensation?
It is how those disparate sensations pool together into a localized somatic experience. The heat in the neck and the clenched jaw translate into a feeling of highly coiled kinetic energy. It feels like a pressurized expansion in the chest. It is an intense urge for physical action or movement.
Okay, I feel that.
But crucially, layer 2 is still pre-verbal. It is just raw energy demanding an outlet.
And here's where the absolute chaos begins. Layer 3, thought.
Precisely. Layer 3 is where the conscious mind aggressively steps in. As we discussed, the brain despises ambiguity. It cannot tolerate a state of high physiological arousal without a logical explanation.
It needs a reason.
So the mind looks at the clenched jaw, the heat, the coiled energy, and it rapidly constructs a narrative to justify the physical state. It says, they betrayed me. They are trying to sabotage my career. I'm surrounded by backstabbers, and I have to destroy them before they destroy me.
The mind writes a script of pure victimization or aggression to make sense of the adrenaline.
And because we believe the script, we instantly arrive at layer 4, emotion.
Yes. Emotion is the final, crystallized, interpreted state.
Because you blindly accepted the layer 3 thought, I am being sabotaged, that raw coiled energy from layer 2 is forged into the complex emotion of profound resentment or rage. You have now run the full stack, usually in less than half a second, and you are sitting in your office drafting a career-ending email.
And once you hit layer 4, the mind tends to collapse the entire experience into an identity statement. You don't just say, I'm experiencing rage. You hit the desk and say, I am an angry person. I am a victim of this toxic culture.
Right.
Think about how incredibly trapping that is. You have taken a fleeting, localized biological response to a specific breach of trust, and you have flattened it into a permanent character verdict about your reality.
This self-fulfilling prophecy.
But by running the stack, by actively slowing the sequence down, you give yourself the power to insert a wedge into the machinery.
And the most effective interception point is almost always at layer 3, the thought.
How do we intercept it?
If you can cultivate enough meta-awareness to pause when you feel that initial flush of heat and that coiled energy in your chest, you can intervene. You can remind yourself, as the wise parent, that the body is just sounding a biological alarm.
It's just an alarm.
It is merely saying, high-stakes relational anomaly detected, adrenaline deployed for potential conflict. If you intercept the narrative at layer 3, you can change the outcome.
So instead of defaulting to the script, they are trying to destroy my career.
You can say, wow, my body is heavily flooded with adrenaline because this situation feels intensely unjust and my boundaries were crossed. I'm highly activated right now.
Just stating facts.
If you shift the thought to an objective observation of your physical state, the final emotion transforms. The coiled energy might crystallize into heightened, sharp clarity or firm resolve rather than blinding, destructive rage. You maintain your executive function.
The functional relief in this is staggering. If you realize that you are not your immediate automated reactions, that you are just processing raw data, you create so much operational breathing room.
So much space.
And circling back to dimensional homonymy, this concept of the stack also gives you radical permission to be psychologically complex.
In what way?
Let's say you are navigating the cognitive dissonance of succeeding at a highly lucrative job that you find ethically questionable or deeply unfulfilling.
Very common.
You can be profoundly grateful for the financial security it provides your family and simultaneously feel a deep, agonizing grief over the compromise of your artistic or moral values.
Culture true.
The flattening mind says, if you are sad, you are ungrateful. Pick a lane.
Right.
But the dimensional mind understands that you are not a hypocrite. You aren't faking your gratitude and you aren't faking your grief. You are just a multidimensional smartphone with the flashlight of gratitude and the camera of grief operating on two different background threads at the exact same time.
That specific permission to hold conflicting states without short-circuiting is the hallmark of psychological maturity. It allows individuals to process extreme cognitive dissonance without layering massive amounts of meta-guilt on top of their initial pain.
Meta-guilt is the worst.
It really is.
Yeah.
Which flows seamlessly into our next critical exploration. If we're these complex, multidimensional, ever-shifting beings processing stacks of data every second, then the rigid linguistic labels we use to describe ourselves need a catastrophic overhaul.
Absolutely. This pulls us out of the internal processing and into how we interface with the world. We are looking at Chapter 2, Pillar 4. This section is entirely focused on title and introduces a revolutionary linguistic framework they call nounships.
Nounships.
This is fundamentally about escaping the invisible prison of labels. Let's look at the absolute most dreaded question you can encounter at an upscale networking event or a dinner party.
Oh no.
You're holding a glass of sparkling water, making polite eye contact, and someone inevitably asks, so what do you do?
It is framed as a harmless social pleasantry, a way to establish common ground. But neurologically and psychologically, it is a sophisticated trap.
It is a trap
Yeah.
because it forces us to instantly collapse our massive, multidimensional, chaotic human existence into a single, flat, easily digestible, usually monetized label.
Yep.
We answer by saying, I am a corporate strategist, I am a senior developer, I am a stay-at-home parent. We take a series of actions that we perform during specific hours of the day, and we linguistically mutate it into a noun.
A permanent thing.
We turn something we do into something we fundamentally are.
And that subtle linguistic mutation is where the concept of nounships becomes critical. The text defines a nounship as the conscious, active recognition that the vast majority of the labels we use for ourselves, for our peers, even for inanimate objects, are entirely temporary states.
Temporary states.
They are operational modes we enter and exit, not permanent, architectural verdicts about our core identity.
To explain this, I want to use an analogy from system architecture and programming logic.
Let's hear it.
When you write a piece of code, you frequently assign values to variables. You might have a variable called system status, and depending on the inputs, you might temporarily assign it the value of processing or idle or error.
Right.
When the system is in an error state, you don't throw the entire server rack in the garbage and declare the hard drive fundamentally corrupt.
That would be absurd.
You understand that error is just a temporary value assigned to a variable based on current conditions. Once the conditions change, the variable updates.
That is a phenomenal analogy
Hmm.
because it highlights the difference between temporary software states and permanent hardware architecture.
Exactly.
The problem with human psychology is that we treat our temporary variables as if they are permanent hardware damage. When a project fails, we do not say, I am currently occupying a state of professional failure. We say, I am a failure. We take a localized event and flash it directly to our ROM.
We flash it to the ROM. That's exactly it. And the psychological weight of those I am statements is crushing. This is where the concept of linguistic determinism comes into play.
The words create the reality.
The words we use do not merely describe our reality. They actively construct the boundaries of what we believe is possible. When you repeatedly say, I am an anxious person, or I am a chronic procrastinator, you are locking yourself in a linguistic prison.
You are.
You are actively commanding your brain's operating system to align your future behaviors with that permanent label. Your brain says, well, if we are a procrastinator, there is no point in starting this project early. That would violate our core identity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the linguistic shift required to implement nounships is incredibly subtle on a grammatical level, but the psychological impact is seismic.
How does it sound in practice?
Instead of saying I am anxious, which fuses the anxiety to your identity at a molecular level, a meta-aware individual learns to say, I am currently executing an anxiety subroutine. Or, using the text-specific framework, I am currently occupying an anxious state.
I am in an anxious mode. Just hearing it spoken aloud creates an immediate sense of spaciousness.
Doesn't it?
It creates a critical distance. It structurally separates the you, the witness, the administrator observing the system from the localized state that the system is currently experiencing.
Exactly. It brings us back to the climate and the weather. Anxiety ceases to be the sky. It becomes a passing weather front. A procrastinator is not who you fundamentally are. Procrastination is simply a behavioral mode, a subroutine that your system is currently running because your amygdala is terrified of the vulnerability required by the task at hand.
You're using it as a shield.
You are utilizing procrastination as a shield. You are not the shield.
I have to admit, wait, doesn't assigning a nounship just sound like a semantic trick?
How so?
If I'm sitting in the boardroom, terrified of presenting the quarterly financials, and my hands are actively shaking, calling it a temporary state of elevated neurological arousal doesn't stop my hands from shaking. It sounds like I'm just rebranding my panic to sound more intellectual.
That is a vital pushback. And if you are merely using the language to avoid feeling the physical discomfort, then yes, it is absolutely just semantic window dressing. It's intellectual bypassing.
Right.
But let's look at what actually happens in the brain when you genuinely shift that language. When you say, I am terrified, your amygdala signals the adrenal glands to flood the system, preparing for a fight for your life.
Fight or flight.
But when you consciously shift to non-ship language, when you tell yourself, I am observing my body into a mode of high arousal, you are forcing the prefrontal cortex, the logical language processing center of the brain, to engage.
Oh, wow.
By analyzing the state objectively, you are literally routing electrical activity away from the panic center and into the executive functioning center. The semantic shift is the lever that physically alters the neural pathway.
So it's mechanical.
Your hands might still shake for a few minutes while the adrenaline metabolizes out of your bloodstream, but the story of panic is disrupted. You do not spiral.
So the language isn't a trick, it's a manual override for the nervous system.
Exactly.
The freedom in this is intoxicating. If you rigorously adopt this framework, your identity stops being this heavy, rusted anchor dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean, forcing you to constantly act consistently with your worst, most limiting labels.
That's liberating.
Instead, your identity becomes an agile, fluid playground. You can step into a highly focused execution mode for your work sprint, then consciously power that down and step into a deeply present, playful mode with your children, and then step into a restorative mode on the weekend.
Switching gears smoothly.
You are none of those things permanently, but you have root access to utilize all of them when the environment demands it. It restores your fundamental agency.
It fundamentally shifts you from being a passive victim of your inherited labels to being the active architect of your psychological states.
But of course, as we noted at the very beginning of this deep dive, possessing the architectural blueprint intellectually and actually constructing the building in a hurricane are two vastly different endeavors. Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly most intimidating frontier. We are crossing into Chapter 3. We have arrived at what the text calls the threshold of the known.
The big one.
Think about what we have accomplished so far. We have audited our defense mechanisms with the compassionate scrutiny of the wise parent. We have learned to run the stack, intercepting the raw data of our bodies before it mutates into destructive fictional narratives.
Right.
We have emancipated our identities from the prison of fixed labels by embracing the fluidity of nounships. We have engineered an incredibly robust conceptual architecture. So, now what?
Now you have to tear the scaffolding down.
The construction metaphor used in this section is incredibly stark and honestly a little frightening.
It has to be stark, because the ego will use these very tools as a new place to hide.
Explain that.
The text argues that everything we just analyzed, chapters 0, 1, and 2, the nounships, the stack, the wise parent tests, all of that was merely scaffolding. You have spent immense time and intellectual energy building a flawless conceptual map of how a conscious life should operate.
Building the framework.
You have erected the scaffolding around the perimeter of the building. But eventually, if you ever intend to actually live inside the house, the scaffolding must be dismantled.
You have to take it down.
You have to step away from the podcast, put down the self-help manuals, cease the endless obsessive self-analysis. You have to walk out into the chaotic, unpredictable world to see if the structure actually holds up under the brutal stress testing of real life.
You are finally moving from the intellectual foyer of understanding into the visceral house of being. And crossing this specific threshold requires the participant to accept 3 massive, deeply humbling revelations.
Humbling is the word.
Let's unpack these because they challenge the core tenets of modern intellectualism. Revelation number 1, the map is not the territory.
This is the brutal realization that intellectual acquisition is not the same thing as actual integration.
Give me an example.
Let's use an analogy. You can be the most educated, theoretically profound automotive engineer on the planet. You can study the fluid dynamics of the engine. You can calculate the exact friction coefficient of the tires. You can read endless manuals on advanced defensive driving techniques.
You know everything about the car.
You possess the perfect map. But if I drop you behind the wheel of a high-performance vehicle in the middle of a massive, chaotic, completely foreign city during a torrential downpour with no GPS, you are going to panic and you are going to crash.
Yeah, you don't know the streets.
Knowing how the machine works conceptually does not mean you know how to navigate the territory experientially. You can flawlessly articulate the definition of meta-awareness on a deep dive, but until you can actually maintain that witness state while a furious client is screaming at you over a massive financial error, you do not know the territory.
Intellectualization is just another defense mechanism. We think if we read enough books about swimming, we won't drown when we hit the water. It's a humbling revelation. Which leads us to revelation number 2, the sacred vessel. This connects deeply back to our discussion on running the stack, but it escalates it. It is the realization that the physical body is not merely a meat suit that conveniently transports your highly intellectual brain from meeting to meeting.
This is a profound correction to centuries of Western philosophical bias. Since Descartes, Western culture has deeply conditioned us to treat the body as a cumbersome, unreliable machine. We just need to fuel, hydrate, and occasionally repair it so that our superior minds can continue doing the real work of thinking.
Right, mind over matter.
This revelation entirely inverts that paradigm. The body is the primary receiver, it is the compass, it is the foundational hardware of your existence.
How so?
That subtle tightening in your gut when you sign a contract, the sudden ease in your shoulders when you speak to a certain friend, the subtle change in your respiratory rate when a boundary is crossed, that is not random biological noise.
It's data.
That is a highly evolved, ancient somatic intelligence processing millions of data points per millisecond, recognizing patterns long before your conscious, linguistic mind can even formulate a single sentence.
Wow.
To cross the threshold into real living, you have to completely cease the practice of overriding the body's data with the mind's logic and begin a genuine partnership with your somatic intelligence.
Which acts as the perfect catalyst for the third and final revelation. And I have to be honest, this is the one that is going to cause the maximum amount of friction for our specific listener demographic.
I know exactly where you're going.
The unwitnessed force. The text describes a necessary shift from strict, exhausting, white-knuckled discipline to trust. And the specific, highly loaded word the text uses here is surrender.
Surrender. It is the ultimate threshold.
So what does this all mean? Because I'm going to push back incredibly hard here on behalf of basically every driven, high-performing individual listening to this right now.
Please do.
In our modern, hyper-competitive, hustle culture ecosystem, surrender is practically a profanity.
It really is.
It sounds like giving up. It sounds like apathy. It sounds like waving the white flag, rolling over, adopting a posture of total passivity and saying, well, whatever the universe wants to do to me, I'll just accept it.
Right.
It feels like the exact opposite of everything we just talked about regarding being the administrator of your own operating system. If I am the architect of my life, why on earth would I surrender?
Your reaction is perfectly calibrated, and it is exactly what the source material predicts.
Yeah.
The concept of surrender is absolutely terrifying to the ego.
Terrifying.
Remember the discussion we had about the user interface in Chapter 1?
Yeah.
The ego thrives on the interface. The ego is obsessed with the illusion of control. The ego loves waking up at 4:30 a.m., taking a deliberate plunge into a freezing ice bath, executing a perfectly timed 20-minute transcendental meditation, and checking off the little boxes on a habit tracker app.
Because it feels like progress.
Because it provides a powerful, intoxicating illusion of omnipotence. The ego firmly believes a transactional equation. It thinks, if I just apply enough brutal discipline, if I grip the steering wheel tight enough until my knuckles bleed, if I optimize every single second of my day, I can force the universe to yield to my will and guarantee the outcome I desire.
Right. I did my morning routine, I ran the stack, I used my noun ships, therefore I am immune to failure and tragedy. I win the game of life.
Precisely. It is the ultimate hubris of the intellect, but the threshold of Chapter 3 shatters that illusion. It demands that you wake up to the reality that you are not the sole, isolated generator of the life force.
You aren't in charge of everything.
You are a single interconnected node in an unfathomably massive, complex, distributed network of reality. Surrender, in this highly specific context, is not giving up. It is not apathy. It is not laying on the couch and waiting for success to manifest.
Then what is it?
Surrender is a profound redefinition of your operational role within the system.
How so? Give me an analogy here, because my brain is still actively fighting the idea of letting go of the steering wheel. Let's move away from the orchestra or the car analogies. Let's talk about it in terms of the system architecture we established earlier.
Perfect. Think about a massive global network of servers, the internet itself.
Okay.
For your entire life, fueled by discipline and anxiety, you have been acting like a single, isolated server, desperately trying to manually route all the global traffic by yourself.
That seems exhausting.
It is. You are trying to predict the packet loss. You are trying to force connections that are fundamentally incompatible. You are overheating your CPU, trying to control the data flow of the entire network so that your specific website gets the most traffic.
It's impossible.
It is fundamentally impossible because you only control your localized node. Surrender is the moment you realize the network has its own inherent routing logic. Surrender is ceasing the attempt to control the global data flow.
So what do you control?
You ensure your own server is clean. You patch your own vulnerabilities. You keep your own node online and optimized. That is your discipline, your noun ships, your wise parent audits. But you stop trying to dictate the traffic of the entire internet. You trust the larger network protocols to route the data where it needs to go, even if it bypasses you momentarily.
Wow. You maintain the absolute integrity of your own node, but you release the megalomaniacal delusion that you can control the entire network.
Yes,
You do your work flawlessly, and then you completely detach from the outcome.
exactly. It is trusting the larger systemic routing even when you are sitting in the dark and your specific dashboard does not currently show the metrics you want.
Right.
You know you are functioning correctly because you feel the somatic alignment in your body. You are running the wise parent audits, and you are no longer projecting false narratives onto the data. You transition from trying to violently force the river to flow in your direction to simply becoming a highly skilled navigator riding the current.
That is a staggering paradigm shift, relinquishing the illusion of total network control. I know for a fact that is going to deeply resonate with the burnt-out overachievers listening right now.
The ones running at 99% CPU.
Exactly, the people whose CPUs are constantly running at max capacity trying to manage the universe.
It provides the ultimate psychological relief. Because carrying the delusion that you are solely responsible for controlling every variable in your life is the heaviest, most destructive burden the human ego can bear. Dropping it is not defeat. It is ultimate liberation.
Well, looking back at the terrain we have crossed, we've excavated an immense amount of ground today. We have taken a massive, highly technical journey through the practical, real-world application of chapters 0 through 3.
We really have.
But I don't want to just give a bulleted summary of everything we said. I want to look at the total shift in perspective we are offering here. We started with a mind that felt like a chaotic, inescapable prison of past traumas and fixed destinies. And systematically, we provided the keys to dismantle that prison. We realized we are the witness observing the UI, not the software itself. We learned that the ego's excuses are just misguided bodyguards, and we learned how to relieve them of duty using the wise parent's compassionate interrogation.
A completely new approach.
We dissected the chaos of our physical reactions, learning to run the stack so we can experience the raw data of our lives without being poisoned by our mind's dramatic fictions. We broke out of the linguistic straitjacket of I am statements, opting for the fluid, programmatic freedom of nounships.
Moving from fixed labels to temporary modes.
And finally, we confronted the ultimate ego death of surrendering our illusion of absolute control, choosing instead to maintain the integrity of our own node while trusting the broader network.
It is nothing short of a complete architectural overhaul of how you process, interpret, and engage with the reality unfolding around you.
So here is your direct, actionable call to action. We have handed you a highly sophisticated toolkit today. The worst thing you can do right now is attempt to use all of these tools simultaneously tomorrow morning.
Do not do that.
You will overwhelm your system and revert to your old code. Pick just one single concept we unpacked today, just one.
Cool.
Tomorrow, when you feel the urge to procrastinate on a difficult task, do not shame yourself. Be the wise parent and ask your ego what is actually afraid of.
Or run the stack.
Yes. The next time you feel a sudden spike of adrenaline during a tense conversation, pause for half a second and run the stack. Separate the literal heat in your neck from the story in your head.
Or use a noun ship.
Exactly. Simply catch yourself about to declare I am a failure and rewrite the code to say I am currently occupying a mode where I am struggling. The root access to your operating system is literally sitting in your hands.
And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with one final lingering idea to mull over in the quiet moments of your week. It builds upon the source material's exploration of thresholds and a concept they refer to as the threshold song and nested handlers.
Lay it on us.
Think about the biggest, most intimidating threshold you are currently standing in front of right now. The one you are desperately afraid to cross.
Okay.
Maybe it is initiating a massive pivot in your career, having a deeply vulnerable conversation that could alter a foundational relationship, or finally launching a creative endeavor you have kept hidden. We are culturally conditioned to view our internal resistance to that change as a massive, solid brick wall designed to keep us out.
We think we have to fight it.
We think we need to aggressively hammer through it with more discipline and more force. But what if it is not a wall at all?
What else would it be?
What if that resistance is simply a nested handler, a frightened, heavily armored, outdated version of you standing guard at a door that is already wide open? What if that handler is just trying to enforce a set of survival rules that you wrote 20 years ago, rules that kept you safe during a trauma that is no longer happening?
Oh, wow. It's an obsolete line of code still trying to run a security protocol for a threat that doesn't exist anymore.
Precisely. So the question becomes, what happens when you stop aggressively fighting that resistance? What happens when you look at that internal, exhausted guard, not with frustration or anger, but with the profound, radical compassion of the wise parent?
Just talking to it.
What happens when you look at that outdated version of yourself and simply say, thank you. Thank you for standing guard all these years. You did your job perfectly when we needed you. But the war is over. We don't need this protocol anymore. You can rest now. It's finally safe to walk through the door.
That reframes the entire concept of self-sabotage. You aren't fighting an enemy. You are retiring an obsolete, exhausted bodyguard. You don't have to break the door down. You just have to relieve the guard of duty with compassion.
Exactly.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. We invite you to find your threshold this week, to run the audit, and to step through into the unknown. We look forward to seeing you for the next exploration. Until then, stay curious, be the wise parent, and keep unpacking the code.